Hey there, welcome to today's live stream. Today we're going to be covering a topic that's maybe a little bit different from the topics that we normally cover. We're not going to be so in the weeds on content marketing and SEO, but we're going to be talking about the business side and specifically about agencies. So if you're an agency owner or an aspiring agency owner, this is the session for you. We're going to be talking with Dev Basu. He's the CEO of Powered by Search, and he's going to be sharing some of his hard-won lessons on growing an agency. And more importantly, he's going to be walking us through a workshop on identifying bottlenecks in growing your agency. The challenging thing about agency growth is that there's no one size fits all solution, right? You just sort of wander through the process, you run into to challenges. A lot of times there are things that other people have also figured out, but your agency is a little different. So you have to kind of figure out what the right solution might be or what the problems are in some cases. And you don't always have a clear vision for how you get from point A to point B. So today I'm really excited to dig in with Dev, learn from his experience and some of the lessons that he shares with other agency owners in this workshop. Before we bring Dev on, I do have to make my normal pitches here. So first and foremost, if you're watching the stream now, please like our video here to help other people find us. Secondly, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We host regular workshops, live Q&As, roundtable discussions, all kinds of cool stuff on content marketing, SEO, freelance life, agency growth, all kinds of topics. So definitely please hit the subscribe button and join us for future upcoming sessions. We've got some great stuff scheduled coming up in the very near future. And my last piece here is if you're not already a member of Top of the Funnel, please join our community there. Yesoptimist.com/tofu. This is a free Slack community. It's where we post all of this content first and foremost. And secondly, there's just a great group of people there, almost 1,500 marketers, content folks, SEO people, everything from in-house to agency to freelancers. Definitely join us there. There's all kinds of great discussion, work opportunities, and all kinds of things happening inside the group. Would love to have you join us. All right. With all of that out of the way, let me go ahead and introduce again Dev Basu is our guest today. He is the CEO and founder of Powered by Search, which is a B2B SaaS marketing and demand gen agency. I would sort of categorize them as. And today he's going to be sharing with us his workshop on identifying and overcoming agency bottlenecks. Hey, Dev.
Tyler, great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was just thinking about we last connected, I think maybe like a year ago, and we just kind of talked shop about everything, and you were sharing kind of your story about Powered by Search. What can you just give us a quick background on the agency and what you've been doing?
Yeah, for sure. So started it in 2009, straight out of university at that time. I went to business school and didn't learn a lick about business over there. So I decided to get my own personal MBA and give it a go for 6 months and go out into my own and start this business that was never really intended to be an agency. It started out as a solo consulting shop, if you will, and I'd been agency side and building SEO teams before that. So cut my teeth on SEO since I was a young buck. I started in the world of SEO when I was about 17. And by 20, I was running this agency. Where we are today, as you mentioned, is a B2B SaaS agency. Most of our clients kind of think of us like the McKinsey of growth, essentially. And so they come to us for strategies and playbooks for growing their business. And we work with some of the world's best, B2B SaaS businesses. The last 24 months have been a bit of a whirlwind. We've been growing 8 to 10% every single month. And so we beat our goal last year by August, I think, and had already doubled in that by that point in time. So different sets of challenges throughout this entire experience. I'm excited to be here because for some of the folks in this top of funnel community that you were talking about, I've been exactly, if you're watching right now, I've been where you're at, both as a one person founder running the show to the, getting to 3 people to 5 to scaling it up to the point where you get to your first 10K a month client to your first, 100 grand a year to first $1 million a year to, the first $10 million a year, first $1 million a year in profit and beyond, basically. So there's this level is basically associated with that. So I'm excited to share some stuff that we've, learned over the last decade plus, and also things that I share in a mentorship capacity now with other agency owners as well, who I coach, either to help find their first $1 million in their business or their next $1 million in their business, and to help, have more fun and help more people while doing it. So I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, awesome. Let's do it.
Okay, cool. So I like to make these sessions interactive as possible. So if you're here, drop your name, your agency, and what kind of client you actually work with in the chat as well. I just want to get a quick feel for the room in terms of folks who are doing SEO, web design, other types of digital, basically as well. That way, this ends up being more of a conversation than a presentation. It's actually one of the principles that we believe in. And I want to see that pop into the chat right now. And then I want to get a sense of where you're at in terms of size. Are you a solo operator, small team, larger team? And that'll give me a sense of where we can take this. In terms of conversation, I want to show you a quick 15-minute way of auditing where your agency is at. So you might be experiencing different bottlenecks in your growth right now. Typically, what I see is for agencies that are under $500,000 a year in revenue, often that's a lead generation challenge. If you're like Tyler, he doesn't have a lead generation challenge at all, and I know you're booked out for months and quarters basically in advance. So the challenge then shifts to delivery rather than lead gen. And then if you're a little bit bigger than 500K up to that $1 million mark, one of the challenges I notice over there is really in selling. So there's a lot of it is very founder led. And the question becomes, can anyone sell what we do? Or do you have founder magic, basically, right? And so if you have that sort of magical fairy dust as a founder, how can you actually have a conversation with prospects in a way which is very reliable, that follows a process, and you're not selling differently basically every single time. So we'll have a chat about each one of those, but I definitely want to cater this to, you're in one of those three buckets. You're either having challenges attracting the right kinds of clients, you're having challenges converting them from a prospect into a client, and then finally in client service, when you're actually delivering, it could be a challenge related to how do I find the right people to join our team and have them work together, to how do I keep these clients around. The average agency's retention for each client is actually pretty poor. It ranges somewhere between 3 and 6 months, and so you work really hard to close these deals, and then you can't hang on to them because of diverging expectations between the client and what you've got going on as well. And so we'll talk about some of those things, but I primarily want to understand, what's the biggest challenge for you right now? Is it getting the right leads? Is it attracting? Is it converting? Having a sales process or system for being able to take a conversation and turn them into a client? Or is it in the delivery stage, basically? So if you drop that into the chat, we can start going into it. And then Tyler, I'm sure you could see folks on your end that I can't, so I'll rely on you for pulling some answer stuff if they start coming in.
Yeah. We've got Nick. He runs an agency called Social Nickel. Hey Nick, he's a Des Moines guy. I know Nick. He says it's himself and 2 contractors. They do social media management, Facebook ad management, some SEO. Then we've got Taylor. He owns a 7-person growth marketing agency focused on B2B SaaS. Somebody who might know a thing about that. He says that he's one of 2 co-founders. Last year, they did about 330K, and they're struggling with lead gen at the moment.
Okay.
Nick also mentioned one of his challenges is finding the right people to pay higher prices and who value the work. And then we've also got Maximilian. He says he runs X City Marketing. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Social media and marketing for small companies. It's about 2 to 3 people on their team, and they're doing 15 to 20K a month. Their main challenge right now is finding clients with enough budget. We've got Shannon. Shannon owns and runs a content marketing agency. They've got 10 contractors. They do specialized premium content marketing, and the challenge is delivery, how to scale
Mm.
what they deliver. Yeah. So
Hmm.
really quite the gamut here.
Yeah.
All the challenges, which again is sort of what I was referring to in the intro, is that like, it's tough because there are some similar challenges, but every agency is a little bit different, right? You've got sort of your own unique sauce, and you got to figure out
Yeah.
how that applies.
100%. And you know what I'm hearing from all of that is there's some common patterns that were emerging over there. So um, the folks who have more than 10 people on their team seem to have a challenge in like service delivery and like getting people to talk to each other and workflow, especially if they're contractors. There's no common ground or bond. They're not onboarded exactly the same way. They may be engaged from a project to a project or for short-term programs. And then for the folks who have less than 10 people, it sounds a lot more like, how do I find a client who is going to pay me what I'm worth, or what we're worth? How do I go up market from smaller businesses to larger businesses? How should we charge for what we do? And then it sounds like most folks on this call are still primarily founder led, meaning that they're probably the ones doing a lot of the prospecting and selling, or at least talking to folks who are interested in working with you. So that
Mhm.
sounds like most of the audience over here. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and we'll walk through a model here for how to think about your business, basically. And so I created this called the $1 Million Agency model about 3 years ago. And the idea basically is that every one of you effectively want either a seven-figure agency to find your first $1 million, or to scale up to your consecutive two, three, four, five. And the types of folks that I work with are, at least from a mentorship capacity, are the folks who have got to that initial level of scale. So about $20,000 per month, you know, a founder plus at least two other team members that are full-time equivalent sort of team members. And primarily the thing that everybody wants as an agency founder is a combination of, yes, definitely more money, but to not live a miserable life while you do it. So more fun and more freedom while you get there. And so how do you make that essentially happen? There are 9 different accelerators, revenue accelerators for your agency that you should be thinking about. And then starts off with, again, these 3 phases, if you will. There's a phase of how do I get the right leads and how do I attract them to my business. Second is a conversion phase. So how do I now start having a conversation with this prospect? And instead of auditioning as if you're one of 10 agencies, for example, that they may be speaking to, and feeling like you're running their process rather than them being filtered through your process. How do you make that so that you come up with premium positioning? And then finally, a delivery, where, especially for folks who are running into multiple clients coming on board, multiple projects, or you have 10 or more people and more people being added on and offboarding all the time, you might be feeling a lot of friction in the work that you're doing. And so if that's you, just type in friction into the chat so that, you let Tyler and I know that that's where you're at. Um, as you start looking at this, you can start seeing that if you have enough leads and you have delivery sorted out, that's the recipe for freedom in your business. In other words, you don't need to worry about where those leads are coming from. You don't need to worry about keeping your promises and delivery. If you've got a way of being able to attract the right leads and a way to sell them through, that leads to very dependable sources of growing your money, your income, and your wealth. And then it gets really fun when you've got the confidence both for conversion as well as delivery, because then you can start building up almost like a quiet confidence where you've got some swagger basically into your step every time you have a conversation. You're not leading from a place of being on the back of your heels essentially. And as you start thinking about each one of these areas, what we do is just use a simple traffic light system. It's like a stoplight, right? Red, stopped; yellow, slower or slowing down; or green is like go, go, go. We can actually go through in each one of these areas. And so generally speaking, when I speak to agency owners, they've got one of these systems kind of working right now, but the other two are either yellow or red. And for smaller agencies, again, that sub sort of $500,000, lead generation tends to be a big problem. For slightly larger ones, delivery and conversion tends to be a big problem. But I usually call this a little bit like juggling plates, essentially. You might be wearing different hats in your agency at any given day. What ends up happening is if you're there's some very specific triggers that I've seen and experienced ourselves, frankly. One is you're delivering for a client, you're really trying to crush it for them, and all of a sudden you get that email that says, we need to talk, or can you send me a copy of my contract, for example? And you freak out at that point in time, and you go, all those blog posts that you know that you should have been writing, that you stopped doing for whatever reason, they start popping up and going, okay, maybe I should stop worrying about delivery and spend some time on my lead gen. Or if I have lots of lead gen, if you go through that sort of feast and famine cycle where certain times in your business you just get tons of leads basically coming in, now you're focused on converting them. All your time is spent in proposal writing, in qualifying the leads, negotiating master services agreements or scope of works, for example, and so on. Any of this sounding familiar, by the way, to you, Tyler, like in terms of your own journey?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think especially those, sort of the feast and
Mm.
famine kind of mentality, right? Where it's like, hey, we got tons of leads, we're cranking along, and then you lose a couple clients or COVID hits
Yep.
or whatever happens. And all of a
Yep.
sudden, all you can think about is how do I generate more leads or whatever. And just, constantly sort of swinging between those two things. I think now, hopefully we're at a little bit more of a balanced stage, but definitely have been there for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, I have heard the stat that every year about 25% of the agencies go out of business. And that could be everything from somebody who just goes, I've got a solo consultancy with a couple of contractors. And there's a point where your patience runs out really in the business if you're continuing to juggle all of these different balls at the same time. And so that's where building systems and surrounding yourself with the right people, but also the right clients can really start helping build a more resilient business that basically grows over time. And so pick the area. You already know what you're lacking in right now. You know that you're not having any fun in the business and you kind of dread coming into work every single day. You know, if you're making money but not having any freedom, you know what that feels like as well. And of course, the other challenge that ends up happening a lot as you start scaling up, if you have more contractors, more team members coming on board, there's a point where you can have your revenue double and your profits stay exactly the same or actually go down. And that actually happened to us, a couple of years ago, probably 2015 or 16 sort of time frame. We doubled the revenue, we doubled our staff, and our profits actually went down at that point in time. So, what can we learn from that? We'll talk about that basically as well. Now, in terms of you see sort of on the outliers over here of this Venn diagram, you've got these little labels, and that's what we call revenue accelerators. So within a track, there are three things that you need to get right. One is you need to build authority in the space. The world doesn't need another generalist content marketing agency, web design agency, SEO agency, for example, because the trouble over here is that if you put yourself into your prospect shoes for just a second, they have no way of telling who's good and who's not. That's why they run RFP processes. That's why they reach out and talk to 5 agencies. And because they don't know any better, they go with either the the sales pitch where they overpromise and they underdeliver, or they go with the lowest price because that's a way of reducing their risk essentially. And so kind of it helps to take a walk in the buyer's shoes to understand why they do this. But if you have authority, if you're like clearly and meaningfully differentiated in this space, you don't end up having those conversations at all. Like your clients already come to you because you built essentially a bit of a reputation around how you show up in your market. So there's ways of being able to do that. The second way is this, and this kind of scares the bejesus out of most agency owners, and that's narrowing your niche. I'm sure you guys have heard sort of the riches are in the niches, and we used to be a more generalist agency in our past, and then we specifically repositioned only to B2B SaaS and got really darn good at it. Well, why did we do that? There's a number of different reasons, but when you narrow your positioning, you get everything becomes clear. It's almost like if for those of you who wear contact lenses or glasses, when in the morning you put that on and everything it goes from being foggy to clear. That's a little bit of what it actually feels like because you don't have to worry about what kind of content to create. Your story around how you help the businesses you help is exactly the same. And the big main fear that I see over here is that a lot of business owners go, "Won't I be pigeonholed if that happens?" And the reality is, there's an adage about the stock market that the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. And so It's quite similar actually with picking a niche. There's so many fish in the sea, and in terms of clients, that you could pick a sub niche of a sub niche and still not run out of a total addressable market, of clients basically. And you could integrate this vertically and horizontally from a positioning standpoint as well. Vertically being something like, I only want to deal with, I'm going to pick an example. I only want to deal with HVAC, for example. And this is one of the agencies that I actually coach. They're an HVAC marketing agency. All they do is do lead generation for plumbers and electricians and roofers and that type of thing. You could also integrate to narrow down your niche horizontally as well. So, for example, marketing for Gen Z or for millennials, for example, that's more, you could work with a number of different brands, but you're doing it for a certain band of people as opposed to an industry in this case. And then you can do it like the way we do it. We do it for B2B software as a service companies that are mid-market or enterprise specifically. We have a very carved down sort of niche or niche customer profile that we go after. And the final piece is filling the funnel, which is, what are your lead generation activities? I mean, how are you getting them today? And the mistake that I see a lot of agency owners make over here is they're very proud of the number of referrals that they actually get. There's nothing wrong with referrals whatsoever. The problem, of course, is that you can't engineer them out of thin air. So if you were just going to go, you know what, we need 5 new leads next week, that won't end up happening from referrals because largely you can't control. You can ask for them, but you can't control when they'll actually start coming in. So they're great to have, but it's nice to have them almost as a feather in your cap as opposed to your core lead generation strategy. When it comes to building authority, narrowing niche, and filling funnel, just in that lead generation component, when you get it right, if everything's green, you basically go from being obscure in your market, sort of the best kept secret in town, to being dominant, where you don't have to worry about this anymore. And you start getting people who are approaching you who are already sold on you based off the content you publish, the material, the conferences you speak at, for example. They come in already sort of converted, essentially. They believe in what you do and how you do it, and they want to work with you. So what's the biggest challenge when it comes to lead generation for you right now? Drop it in the chat. Tyler, if you could start calling that out, we'll just kind of keep that in mind, and we'll talk about a couple of questions we can use to be able to go through and say, where is the real roadblock and what can we do to start solving it? And if there's anything else that's popping in the chat naturally, just share that as well, Tyler.
Yeah, a couple people were echoing your friction, saying that they're feeling the friction on the delivery side. So, yeah, I can just say too, like on this in this specific area, we sort of went through an exercise here, and I definitely felt the same way about having more focus and having a lot of clarity around what we're doing. I mean, I think one of the things that we have struggled with is that we've tried to do a lot of different sort of flavors of content marketing for different types of companies. And frankly, like you just can't be an expert at everything. Like you just can't. If you want to be an authority and you want to be dominant at what you do, then you have to, by nature, focus that in, right? Because you can't be an expert at every single facet of marketing, right? So you do have to, I guess narrow it down. Taylor says that getting responses is the biggest challenge with lead gen, and I assume that they mentioned that they're trying some cold email, some LinkedIn automation, and that those things don't seem to be working anymore, and that paid is expensive. So sounds like they're thinking a little bit more tactically in terms of how do I actually get in front of these people and how do I turn those
let's talk about that actually. So when it comes to this tactical approach, what I've seen a lot of agency owners do is they'll invest in something for a season, and as soon as the wind blows the other way, they basically go abandon that completely and try something else. So it's a lot of stopping and starting that ends up happening rather than committing and sort of digging into one channel and getting it right. Almost universally, what I recommend to most agency owners, and it's worked for us, like this is the bulk of our business is built off our content strategy and SEO. So we pretty much rank for most B2B SaaS or SaaS marketing oriented terms out there. And where that comes from, by the way, notice that like this is these Venn diagrams and sort of the way that this is built together. It's not a funnel, meaning it's not a start to stop sort of process. It's more of a circle that keeps going around in terms of a flywheel. So in terms of the types of leads, if you want to get the right types of leads that have the right pain points, what we want to do is listen to the pain points that prospects are sharing with us, things that they don't know how to do, or things that they've tried that have not worked out well for them. And you probably have a point of view on that. Your point of view is already present in the emails you shared with them, in the deck you shared with them. It's in your scope of work or proposals, for example. But where it's not is on your blog. And so if you think about that one-to-one communication that you've already spent the time working on, and if it's not on your website, how are you going to get more people who have that same problem similar to the client that you actually sold through, converted, and that's winning with you right now? So that's what we want to do over here as well in the delivery component of things. We want a way of being able to take all the work that we're doing and starting to coin some terms and some IP basically around it, take that and then publish it. Use the publishing to drive the leads and filling the funnel. Filling the funnel leads to a way for us to listen to our prospects, which then leads to a way for us to systemize the delivery of the work we do, thereby going from friction to flow. So they all kind of build on top of each other. And I'll walk through the questions that you might want to think about. Now, it's always better to do this inbound than outbound, because if you think about it from an outbound perspective, not that it doesn't work, it really does. It's just got the highest cost of acquisition and the most amount of headache associated with it. Simply because, again, if you put yourself into the prospect shoes and think about their LinkedIn inbox or their email inbox, how many of those emails do you even get today as an agency owner? You get other white label agencies who want to pitch you their website development services, their WordPress PhD to HTML services, every stripe of service that you can imagine. It's a really, really crowded place to be. So you can be clever, you can start to stand out in a bunch of different ways. But the fundamental reason why cold email doesn't work quite as well is that it doesn't have that inherent pain point, right? The types of prospects, if you think about your own profile of clients or your roster right now that convert, are the ones who had a very observable pain point. They reached out to someone, maybe a friend, maybe a colleague, maybe Google search, to say, I need to solve this pain point. They did something, and they either got a recommendation or they found you somehow, but they already knew what their pain was. And so now they're vetting out, can you solve my pain, which is what happens in this sort of talking it out phase and developing a proposal phase. And then they don't know that you can actually solve the pain when they sign the dotted line, obviously, right? They believe you can, and that's demonstrated in the delivery phase over here. So if you kind of flip this on its head, what we care about doing is taking the learnings that you are already, by the way, sharing in reports and conversations with clients, and really adopting a mindset from like, how do I go from one to one, which is like every client gets a customized set of conversations, recommendations, reports, etc. And how do I turn that into a one-to-many conversation so I get more clients like my best clients and less clients like my worst clients, essentially? That's the whole game, basically, to figure this out. I maybe want to dive into the questions now, Tyler. If that's cool with you, to start thinking about like how to grade yourself, because this is all possible to. You can get a really good picture of where you're at, and then I want to leave lots of time for specific questions, so we can go from like high level to eye level really, really quickly. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So this is just a zoom out on this site that I have called million-dollar-agency.coach. And if you wanted a copy of this, you can just go to million-dollar-agency.coach/audit to be able to get the document that I'm about to show you. It walks through those 9 different revenue accelerators. So let's dive into what the actual, like what you'll see on the other side of this. So I call it the 7-figure agency audit. And basically what it does is it answers the question, how well can you scale this business that you've got? Again, using a red, yellow, and green system, just like a traffic light. Are you the worst in your market on different revenue accelerators, or are you sort of best in market? One thing that I'll caution most people like kind of filling this out is we tend to see people who are either overconfident and they think they're doing a lot better than they actually are. But more frequently, what we actually see is a bunch of very self-deprecating folks who just go, man, everything sucks in my agency right now. And that's not true either at all, right? You've got like bright spots. So it's important to calibrate and like walk through this in a way which is kind of even keeled, essentially. That's what we're hoping for. But there's 9 questions, and you're going to grade yourself without too much judgment. So the first number
Dev,
that pops into your mind. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. We're seeing the website right now. Are you
Oh, I
sharing
think
the question?
there. Thank you for
There we
that.
go.
It should be sharing
There you
this
go.
tab. There you go.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, but so back to there's a scale, and what I want you to do is just like answer this question for yourself, and don't think about it too hard. It's the first answer that pops into your head. You already know where this is at. It takes away for how you felt about it and how it kind of feels in the back of your mind, and putting it down on paper. One of the things I coach a lot of agency owners on is, you just want to be able to get out of your own head, and by extracting the thought and putting it somewhere you can look at it, it's not something that you have to hold on, just that keeps rattling around in your mind that much. You can now actually start going, okay, that's reality. This is how it is. How do I make it better? That's what you're going to really focus on. The first one's about narrowing your niche, because remember, like, we want to really have this approach around really being laser focused about who you help, what problems you solve, and how your service basically works. You can absolutely succeed as a generalist agency, but if you think about most generalist agencies that are doing a great job, they tend to have far more people, right? So, like, sometimes 50 plus people, for example. They tend to have high revenues, but they tend to have sometimes fairly low profit margins as well. And the reason for that is, if you did a breakdown of revenue analysis on those businesses, there's some wildly profitable clients, and there's a lot that they're actually subsidizing because they don't make any money on them. It actually costs money to work with those clients. That's not something that you would see from the top line. You have that sort of adage of never judge somebody else's exterior success to your own internal success. Same kind of thing basically over here as well. But all it stands to show is that if you narrow your niche, you have focus, and on that focus you can build a service offering, your marketing, your content, your positioning. Everything becomes easier basically from there. So the question is, how narrowly focused is your positioning, where you are seen as a specialist agency solving problems for a specific kind of client? And if you want to make it even better, specialist agency solving specific problems for a specific kind of client is where I would maybe even make that question a little bit better. And if you are anywhere in the red, pick between 1 and 5. If you can't answer that question conclusively, maybe you are focusing in on direct to consumer businesses or something like that, and you're like an Instagram ads or just a paid ads agency for direct to consumer businesses. Well, you might look at that and go, okay, so I do have narrowly focused positioning, but I'm not a specialist. I'm still seen as one among many for the type of client, but I do have a specific client. In that case, go 6, 7, and 8. But if you tend to be, you know, the the top 5 agency in your space for the specific type of problem you solve and the specific kind of client you help, you would put in a number closer to 9 or 10, right? And so, Tyler, when I think about Optimist and content marketing agency for B2B SaaS specifically, I would put you guys at a 9 or 10. Curious where you might rank yourself, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think I mentioned, we sort of have gone through a process on this similarly. I would say, I would honestly probably put us more like an 8 to a 9.
Okay.
We've sort of refined our positioning a little bit more to focus more specifically on sort of the intersection of SEO and content.
Hmm.
But yeah, a big part of that was definitely like, hey, we don't want to be one of a billion content marketing agencies. We want to be
Yeah.
a sort of a specific strategic partner that achieves a
Right.
specific outcome for certain types of clients. And I think that's really, really powerful.
That's 100% powerful. And like, you can look at like comparative positioning as well. There's another agency in this space called Animals, and they kind of lead with content marketing that is focused around thought leadership for technology companies. At least that's the way I perceive their positioning. So it's got less of that SEO focus and way more focus on brand voice and tone of the entire brand. And like, SEO is almost a byproduct if it ends up happening. But the thought leadership component is what their clients are seeking from them. So you put your score down. Again, you shouldn't have thought about it too deeply at this point in time. We're going to keep trucking along. The next one is building authority. And the question is, how easy is it for your clients to simply, quickly, and easily understand and accept why your agency is the best in the market to solve their problems? And so if you've gone through your deck and you've got basically or a conversation for that matter, and most of your clients are kind of going, yeah, so I get that you do X for, X service for Y type of client for Z price or Z price. still don't understand why I should go with you versus these other 3 proposals, for example, that I have. If that's you, you're probably in the red. If you get feedback where they very quickly and easily understand, but it's hard for them to accept why you're really meaningfully differentiated in this case, you might be in the yellow. But if you're kind of nailing all 3 of those, it's you can explain it simply, you can do it so quickly without being long-winded, and you can actually get them to both understand and accept that you might be in the green. And the last piece of this is filling funnels. So how successful, not just if you have a strategy, how successful is it to generate, is your marketing strategy to generate inbound leads from ideal clients and have them keen to engage in a dialogue with you? Let's kind of break that down. Here are some triggers of when this is not happening. So if you don't have a marketing strategy, you're in the red. Okay. If you aren't generating inbound leads from ideal clients and you have a whole bunch of non-fit clients basically pop in, that may also be a contributor to being on the lower end of the scale. And then finally, are they keen to engage in a dialogue with you? So if you have people who fill out a form or book a meeting but never show up, they kind of just ghost you, and then they're hard to communicate with, then they're not really keen in that case, right? They're just filling out a form to run through a motion of talking to multiple agencies at the same time, and that's what we give you your score. However, if you have a repeatable process, right, you can build these inbound leads, and they're continually inching up to being the ideal client profile, and they're keen to have a dialogue with you, you would be a 9 over here. So I think, Tyler, you're probably in the position where you have too many leads essentially to deal with that are a high quality fit, and the challenges in scaling a business like that is further down in the delivery. Would I be about right in assuming that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably our primary challenge at the moment for sure.
Okay, so just to give you some benchmark scores, and we've seen tons and tons of these basically being filled out and shared. Generally speaking, the average attract score comes in right around a 5, where it's neither here nor there, but it is in the kind of the red, and there's a lot of room for improvement over here. And the types of agencies who experience that tend to be, again, that sort of sub $500,000 per year type of agency from an income standpoint. Let's move to convert. And so convert is about 3 things. Number one, what we want to do is have a process for selling rather than adopting the buyer's process for buying. And so if you, for example, get those emails where someone says, "Hey, I'm running an RFP. I need responses. Today's like, Thursday. I need responses by Monday." And you don't know why you're being asked. You don't know how many people are participating, and they kind of are very tight-lipped about that. That's a definition of running the buyer's process as opposed to having them run your seller's process. And the question we have over here is, how compelling and repeatable is your sales process to move a client from "I don't know who you are" to "we can't afford not to work with you"? So that's the process of flipping the script essentially, and having the client actually sell you on why you should work with them. Which sounds, by the way, most of the time for people who haven't figured this out, they just go, "That's ridiculous, Dev. Like, what are you talking about over here?" But there are 2 questions that I would, again, to go straight from, again, high level to eye level, that can be quite tactical, that is useful to ask over here. Um, if you have calls with prospects that are 30 minutes to 60 minutes long, and at the end of that time period is when you figure out that they either don't have the budget, they don't have a timing need that's yesterday, they don't really know why they want to work with you versus someone else, then you're not really auditioning the prospect. You're being auditioned. So, it's like Simon Cowell, basically, from American Idol, looking at you going, "You show me why you're so awesome." And if they lead with questions like, "How big is your team? How long have you been around? What's your pricing?" If they're asking most of the questions in the process in the initial conversation, then you might have a lower score over here. What we want to do from a very tactical perspective is we want call control. We want to be able to set an agenda very quickly with the client. Or the prospect. We want to tell them how long the call is and actually shorten the length of the call. We want to go from one call closes where you go through a deck and you basically ask them to sign the dotted line or to agree in principle to what you're going to be working on together at the end of that hour-long call, typically, into a 2 or 3 call sequence. And the first call is simply just to figure out if you can even work with them, if you've got something to work on together, if or how you might be able to help them. So 2 questions that might help that you convert at a higher pace is, as soon as you get on a call with the prospect, the first question is, what's going on in your business that made you reach out? Why now? If there's no pain point that's acute right now, immediately the probability of that deal closing goes way, way down. Second question, then you might, you're going to get an honest response typically from a prospect. They'll say something like, how many times have you heard them basically crapping on some other agency that they have worked with? Oh, those guys were terrible. We work with them. We were underwhelmed. We have to get started yesterday. That's a pretty common thing. Tyler, would you agree? Like, do you hear that at all from the people that you guys end up talking to?
Yeah, periodically. I wouldn't say that's as frequent for us. At least not that we've
Yep.
been told directly.
Okay. So they may just be holding back a little bit, or frankly, they've given it a good go in whatever strategy or tactic they tried internally or with an external partner, and ultimately they have a reason for why they're reaching out. So that's question number one. Question number two is why us? So and what that sounds like is, hey, Mr. or Ms. Prospect, of all the different options you have over here, it sounds like you're working on a challenging problem, but of all the different options out there, why do you think us, as in your agency name, is the right fit to help you? And if they can't answer that question immediately within the first 30 seconds of the call, you have a pretty good idea about where they stand. Are they seeing you as one option among many? Or if you hear a different narrative and they say, you know what, I read this blog post, I really loved how you guys have a differentiated point of view on how you're solving ABC problem. That's why we were compelled to talk to you. Now you have a pretty good idea of the fact that they need you more than you need them, frankly, from a prospect qualification standpoint. In other words, they're valuing your services at the appropriate level, which will help down the line, help you charge what you're worth essentially as well. So ask yourself that question, give yourself a score. The second component of it is mastering proposals. So, um, generally speaking, the big thing that I've seen and we've done in ourselves in the past, frankly, is create these really like shiny, polished, pixel perfect proposals. Generally, the idea is the longer the proposal actually is, the better it will be. And that tends to happen more as you start scaling past 10 or 15 people in the business. And when you're in the early days, sometimes you may not do a proposal at all. It could be a conversation and an email, and that's got downsides as well because it's less enforceable down the line if, for whatever reason, you end up having to ramp down the engagement basically with the client. So the question is, how clear, engaging, and easy do you make it for prospects to choose to become a client? And this is the part that's important, by giving them options to choose from in their proposals. So a lot of the time in proposals, if you are putting forward a recommendation, so we will do A, B, and C things, we will do it for this price and for this term. If you just leave it there, what happens is the client can either say yes or no to it. There are no options. It's just a move forward or a no, which is why close rates tend to be lower. But if you said, hey, here's option one, you can do this. Here's an option two, or we could do the other thing. Which option suits you the best? Now you've given them, they're choosing between options. And so psychologically, that's called choice architecture. And what we're doing over here is saying, look, there are multiple ways for me to be able to help you as our agency. Which way do you prefer based off both your budget as well as your need? And so if you ever have clients who come to you and they try cherry picking from the proposal, so they might be interested, but they say, hey, can we drop this? Can we add that in? Can you make these modifications, for example? It's like them writing their own prescription. And one of the challenges, I think, of running an agency business versus most other kinds of businesses is, if you were a lawyer or a surgeon or a doctor, you don't ask your doctor basically to write you a specific prescription. You don't tell the surgeon how to do a surgery. You don't tell your lawyer how to draft a document. But in the professional services business, when it comes to marketing services for agencies, design, that type of thing, clients will often say, I want it this way. I want you to do it. Can you amend what you basically shared? And that, I think, takes away a little bit of your both pricing power and ability to shape the work, because they should really just say, here's my problem. You should be coming up with what the options are based off your process and system. So you want to gather that and go. If you're giving them options to choose from, it's going to be a higher score. If you are making it engaging and easy to say yes, it's still a high score, but it might be in the yellow, for example. If you're doing none of these things, then it's in the red. That makes sense so far?
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the things that I always try to get to is like once you understand the business goals, I think that gives you a lot more power to then, as you were saying, sort of prescribe a
Yeah.
specific solution, right? So like if they
Right.
come to you and they say like, I'm looking for content, I want 4 articles a month or whatever. In our world, that's a red flag because I don't want to be like a service
Yep.
vendor who's just taking orders. I want to be a strategic partner. And to do that,
Yep.
I need to be able to say, okay, your goal is to achieve X% growth in Y months. Here's a plan that I think is going to get you there based on
Mhm.
what you've shared with me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, who wants to be in that server responder or order taker type of model? I know that, we've been there. I'm sure some of you are as well. It's not a fun place to be. And so you got to find a way to be able to work out of that and into this sort of very strategic seat where you're almost hired like a trusted advisor by your client instead of the, they don't hire you to free up their time or to offload to lower cost labor essentially. um, you definitely don't want to be the hired help in this case, for example. What you want to be is that strategic partner who you've got answers to questions that they couldn't have done a good job of answering themselves. That's when you know you're in that seat. um, the last question is really closing consistently. Most agencies don't know what their close rate is. I don't know if you know what your close rate is right now, but it's a very important number to actually track. And when I coach smaller agencies, often they don't even have a CRM system. They just it's almost a free for all when it comes to deals. Everything pops into your email. You jump on a phone call. There's no way of being able to manage the process, and there's very little metrics from a process around like managing the business specifically. The close rates are pretty important, Nick. If you have a good process, you should be closing somewhere between 40 to 60% basically of your deals. If they're coming in at 20% or lower, there's a lot of room because just by improving this process, you can double the size of the business. And so the question is, how consistently, effectively, and successfully do you close prospects and to become eager clients to start with your agency? So part of the closing process, if you have a whole lot of follow-up emails and checking in emails and you send a proposal and you never hear it back, that would be an example of where you have room for improvement. You might be in the top of the red or early in the yellow basically over here. Um, if you show a proposal rather than send a proposal, meaning like you always have a walkthrough conversation to walk the client through the actual proposal process, then you might be closer to the top of the yellow or into the green. So you want to grade yourself basically here. Generally speaking, a lot of agencies being led by founder-led sales, their convert section tends to be a little bit higher. Probably, I would say around the 7 mark is what we see. So it's still solidly in the yellow, and it's very single point to failure dependent, meaning if the founder got hit by the bus, there would be no one to sell in the business, basically. And so we want to avoid that. And by building systems around this, this is how you can start getting your first new business or salesperson essentially on board. Um, any questions that are popping up about sort of sales, Tyler, just in the chat? And if you haven't thought of one right now, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to selling? Once you already have a lead to get them from a conversation into becoming a client?
I'm gonna go ahead and post that here in the chat. Um, yeah, I mean, I can just, I can say from our perspective, like that is definitely one thing that we've tried to do from the get go is like we try to like pre-qualify clients like before we even get on the phone, like really try to filter out the stuff that's happening. I mean, I think
Yeah.
one trap that you fall into as an agency founder, and I have found myself in this at various times, is that you spend so much time chasing leads that are never going to convert, and then that becomes like your whole life. and
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
and as an introvert, I can also say that like it's also just incredibly draining. Like I've spent periods where I was on 4, 5, 6 sales calls a week, and a handful of those would even go to a proposal, and like
Yep.
it was just exhausting, and that was not a fun place for me personally to be in. I know for sure.
And I can identify with that as well. Actually, I think on conversations or sessions like this, I can often show up like an extrovert, but I think that's a mode that I'm really engaging. I'm an introvert exactly like you, and so I
Yeah.
went like, how do I build some systems in place so that we only end up having those like charging up conversations rather than draining conversations, and then
Hmm.
for everything else, like how do we automate a whole bunch of stuff? So, for example, when we close, we have sequences for follow-ups. If a prospect doesn't respond for something, they run through a sequence. We set good framing, in the closing conversation about when they're going to get started and the stakes of not getting started by that deadline as well. Some things we've done in our business is we put in cohorts for clients coming on board. So, we'll have a cohort that starts next week, middle of the month, basically. And so if someone isn't, we only start them at the beginning and the middle of the month, and there's no ongoing onboarding, because what ends up happening, for at least if your experience is any similar to mine, as soon as a client signs, they want to get started yesterday, even if they drag their feet through the process. And so, and then they want to go like, okay, hurry up and stop, but hurry up now. And so that can affect onboarding and affect retention rates down the line. And so one of the strategies we use over here for follow-up is just to say, hey, like, I need a response from you on this, signed and sealed, signed and delivered by X date, which is typically within somewhere between 3 and 5 business days from when we actually send the scope and the master services agreement. Otherwise, this date that I'm holding for you for your kickoff just won't happen. And so we're in demand. We have lots of people who are interested in working with us. You're going to lose that spot. And so the key idea over here is that there's not one-way stakes, meaning typically, most agencies have invested the most amount of time by the time that they actually send a proposal. And so now they're operating from the back of their heels to follow up, check in, answer emails and keep going unresponded, essentially, or leaving a voicemail like, hey, I'm hoping you just saw this, I just sent you an email right now, and that type of thing. Not a great place to start a strategic partnership basically from, right? And so those are some systems basically to get that done. Do we see any challenges around sales specifically pop in that I might be able to shed some light on?
Doesn't look like it. No, nobody has popped in with any
Yeah.
questions in the chat quite yet.
Again, and this is the area that I think most founders are the most confident in. They just go, okay, if I can get enough leads, I'll jump on the phone and I will sell whoever it is, as long as they're a good quality fit, right? And so they struggle with this the least. Let's talk about the delivery component around talent specifically. And this is if you're not if you're a founder right now who's still doing client work, that would be one of the first things to be able to get out of. And when I say doing client work, the 3 roles that I see most often are directing the client work, being the client relationship manager, or being a project manager. So each one of those role functions are ones that you want to delegate out by leveraging a team to be able to do that for you. One of the other mistakes I often see is thinking of every role like it's a full-time role. It does not need to be at all. So for example, you could have a fractional person, a fractional service, even for that matter, helping you with this type of stuff. But let's kind of dive into what that looks like. First one's called leverage talent, where questions, how consistently, effectively, and successfully do you delegate client success outcomes to your team while elevating their performance and making you the owner wanted but not needed? This is the gold standard. Like, you would, your team would love to have you around, but you're not needed for any of the work actually to get done, and done to a level of satisfaction where they would be proud of it, you would be proud of it, and the client is happy with it. So, you want to grade yourself from, again, 1 to 10 on where this is at. If you're facing a lot of friction, you might be closer to the bottom of the yellow or the red. And the question becomes why, right? So if you, number one thing that I see a lot is if there's a lack of trust in having direct reports follow through on the work. Typical sort of limiting beliefs are no one can do it as good as I can. That's one that popped up. No one will care about this as much as I do is another variation of that. A third one is I'm tired of giving this person direction and them not coming back and hitting the mark. And what I say to all the folks I coach is that 80% done, an 80% done project that you had 0% to do with is better than a 100% done project that you had 100% to do with. So that's essentially the scaling ceiling is ultimately the owner as opposed to the team in this case, if you don't delegate this out. So you can either be like this idea of a rugged individualist, meaning like you're the solo founder who does all of the stuff and does it, it's got guts and glory associated with it, but it still just basically means you're running a small business where you have a job as opposed to, you've got a team that is helping you, again, elevate the performance. Basically, that's where you can get to. We're frankly still in that journey. I mean, if you might have read sort of Rich Dad Poor Dad with the 4 quadrants of building, from like employment to self-employment to a business owner to an investor. We're now at the track where I'm thinking about, how do we become an investor? We're still at like the top end of the business owner level, and like, transitioning to now a management team managing most of the work in the business and so on. And so I'm thinking about like, where can I invest capital to be able to make us, what will make the boat go faster, essentially. But you got to find a way to find the right talent, onboard them properly, set them up for success. The other major mistake that I see a lot is finding a person and just going, here you go, it's your first day, and then walking away. No systems, no training, no mentorship, no feedback, no one-on-ones every single week, and then expecting them to magically figure it out. Unfortunately, it just does not work that way in a people business. Second one is productizing your IP. So this was a big one as you start scaling up. For the folks who had questions about how do I find clients who are willing to pay me more than whatever your current threshold is, if you have a deliberate, structured, and compelling methodology, meaning like you don't just say, I do SEO or content or paid ads or Instagram ads or whatever it basically might be, but I've got a way of doing it and I've coined it. That's what your methodology basically is. You talk about everything you do in the context of that methodology, as opposed to the label associated with it. So for example, our methodology is called the predictable growth methodology. And we've got 9 different systems in it that we use to be able to scale up our B2B SaaS clients. We don't talk about it as, hey, we do SEO for B2B SaaS clients, or hey, we do paid ads for B2B SaaS clients. Because that's the minute your prospect hears that, they go, isn't there this other agency who also does paid ads? And isn't their team a little bit larger? And aren't their costs a little bit lower, for example? And so you really want to create this more of a blue ocean, basically, for yourself by doing this. Generally speaking, productized IP scores are quite low because most business owners are working in the business. They haven't taken the opportunity to zoom out a little bit and go, how do we do what we do? What is our 1, 2, 3 step process for doing it? And can I give it a name associated with it? And then the final piece is systemizing wins, which is most agencies are, frankly, a little bit of a shit show on a day-to-day basis. I hope I'm okay with saying that on your in this session, Tyler. It feels like everything's stuck together by glue. And if you're the firefighter, like if you're a chief firefighter instead of CEO basically in the business, then this is probably what will give you the most freedom and add the most fun in the business. You've all heard of SOPs or standard operating procedures. They sound boring, they're not sexy, but they work like a charm. And so really what we want to do over here is build clear, effective documentation and training our team with a standard playbook of standard operating procedures. And the entire idea is, how do I have repeatable, successful outcomes for every client that you work with? Not just in the doing of the work, by the way, but also in the communication of value. A lot of you probably have to-do lists in whatever project management tool you use to get to an outcome. And you might have like 50 steps to set up an AdWords campaign or 100 steps to do influencer marketing or whatever it might be. Your client doesn't see any of that. So they don't care. They only care about the outcome. And I always say that people do things for their reasons, not for your reasons. So it's just as important to have those steps in the way that you communicate value in your reporting, how you start meetings, how you end meetings, how you do meeting notes, how you do follow-up, how you communicate from your point of contact up to somebody who at a more executive level, like their boss or their boss's boss. And so rate yourself on that. How thoroughly, clearly, and effectively have you trained your team, again, on the scale of 1 to 10, in the way that you've standardized these systems? How consistent is it basically as well? I'll pause there because that's 9 questions. I mean, if you really print this out and go through it, it will only take you 15 minutes to get to the, like, what is the reddest spot basically in my business? And then what is the greenest sort of bright spot? And then once you face reality, you can actually focus on systems to start coming in and solving that. I'll pause sharing now and see, what's been most useful. And if there's a challenge that's still popping up, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Dev Basu. Shoot me a note, and then I'm very happy to jam with you on whatever challenge you're facing right now.
Yeah, that's awesome, Dev. I mean, I can only say, I'll speak for myself first and foremost and say that, a lot of that just resonated really strongly with us. And I think like the key there is, as you said, finding the most red, right? where are the challenges? Where are things lacking? And I think, one of the big takeaways for me is, so much of being able to get to that point where you can systematize and document and do all that stuff means you have to sort of remove yourself from that day to day, right? So you have to sort of
Oh, yeah.
solve the first piece, and then that gives you the freedom and the time and the energy to do things like standardizing and formalizing a lot of the processes and stuff. And I know that's been our journey probably over the last year to 2 years, has been, me extracting myself as much as possible from day-to-day work so that I can focus
Yeah.
on how do I build systems, how do we set people up to be able to deliver this work at a really great level.
Awesome.
Yeah. A couple comments is coming in. So Shannon was just saying, great point about communication of the value in your SOPs. I think that's another one. That's one, frankly, where I think we can definitely improve is like, yeah, communicating with clients and then sharing those wins, demonstrating the value. I think that's, in some cases, that's 50% of it, right? It's like you could do a great job, but if you're not communicating it well to the client, then they may not even be aware. And then Nick really liked the idea of sort of branding that process or service, which I was also intrigued by. How long sort of into your work, Dev, did you sort of develop that or formalize that sort of system that you guys use?
First time was in 2016, and it took us a long time. As you can see, sort of like everything seems like an overnight success until you realize like what went into it. So from 2010 until 2015, we had nothing. We had no way of naming what we did. Basically, we were just like good at what we do, quote unquote. Like so many agency owners who struggle hard to build like a very decent business, happy people, happy clients, right? 2015 is when or 2016 is when we started naming it, and originally we called it the intent engine, where like the thing that we went into was, hey, we really understand search intent really well, so we have a pretty good understanding of like what kind of content and what kind of pages should rank on Google for this, and what is somebody trying to achieve when they Google XYZ term. So we called it the intent engine, which was like the whole idea was we get intent, and we have built this engine, not just like a lever, which was like a common thing in the marketplace was like, what levers are you pulling? And AI is going to disrupt everything, and voice search is going to take over. And so long live SEO, or SEO is dead, long live this other thing would come out every single year. And so that was our first intent. We called it the intent engine. And then what we realized was that's a cool name, but let's just name it what the British call it. It does what it says on the tin, and I really like that saying because the thing that our clients wanted. So we found a bunch of clients who wanted growth hacks. Basically, they wanted like, how do I go to the moon in 1 year and 10x my revenue? And we thought that those people are not very good quality fits for us because they're looking for short-term hacks by nature that'll go out of style. And so the quality businesses that we work with were like, no, we want evergreen growth. We want something that's sustainable. Well, do you want something that's predictable? Yeah, that's what we want. We want predictable. So you want predictable growth? Oh yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we want. And so we go, okay, cool. We're going to call it the predictable growth method. And then we've now built a system. If you Google SaaS positioning canvas, you'll see our thinking on how we do positioning work now for B2B SaaS companies. And you can follow that exact same process, by the way, for yourselves to come up with what your positioning ought to look like. It's not a positioning process specific to SaaS companies that we just apply it to that vertical specifically. It might be of help to you as you start thinking about coining and naming things for yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think I actually do. I think I'll spend some time on that because we have sort of, I think, some of the elements of that. And again, you mentioned as an agency owner, I think a lot of us start out with a very specific point of view, right? Or you have like, okay, here's how I'm going to be better than all the other places. Or I worked at agencies before and they suck because I didn't do X, Y, and Z. And so you have those opinions, right? And so then it's just a matter of like sort of sitting down, formalizing that, turning that into something that you can document and then also communicate, right? Like, again, that's 50% of it. A lot of times it's just taking what you's already in your head and communicating it externally.
And I wanted to say everybody's a writer. Maybe you might not be a good writer, but everybody's a writer because you have emails, you've done decks, you've got reports. You just need somebody to be able to beat that into shape into a narrative that makes sense and is compelling. But the clarity of thought should already hopefully be there because you're communicating with clients every single day anyways, but you're doing it one-to-one. The opportunity is to go from one to many. That's what's going to power your marketing and get the right kinds of leads, basically.
Great. Dev, I know we're a couple minutes over, so we'll wrap up here, but I just wanted to really quick. So Taylor was just asking about the framework specifically. Where's the best place for people to collect this info?
Well, you can find it definitely. I'm just going to put the audit link in here. It's on that page. And then I've got an hour-long training that goes specifically into attract, convert, deliver, and how you might be able to use it with some case studies and things like that as well.
Okay.
Let me see, where is that? I might even have a direct link to that. Give me a second to pop that up.
Yeah, don't worry. So, yeah, so just for everyone here on the stream, $1,000,000agency.coach/audit is where I think that's the worksheet that you walked through, right? Right, Dev?
That's the worksheet, and this is the webinar, which I think will be helpful for a lot of the folks who are in the market for like, how do I get clients every month? So, by the way, it's called How to Get Clients Every Month. It's
that's what's on the tin.
I like to keep it simple.
There you go. Yeah. So the common thread here is $1,000,000agency.coach is Dev's sort of coaching and mentoring site for related to agency growth. And then once again, if you have any other questions for Dev directly, he's on Twitter at Dev Basu.
Yeah, hit me up over there. We'll have a chat. But thank you guys for joining in. Tyler, thanks for inviting me on board.
Yeah, thanks so much again for sharing all this awesome information. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, man.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. All right, y'all. That's it for today. One final plug: if you have not already, please like the video. Please subscribe on YouTube and join us inside Top of the Funnel at yesoptimist.com/tofu, where we have many more upcoming live sessions, Q&As, workshops, etc. All right, that's it for today, y'all. Thanks again for joining, and talk to you soon. Cheers.